Good morning. This is Bill Henry from ITP, and thank you for joining us for our webinar session today that talks about 5 reasons to outsource your IT department. I head up the sales team here at ITP, and ITP focuses on providing technical solutions for businesses and organizations across Wisconsin. We have offices in Madison, Milwaukee, and in the Appleton office, or the Appleton area, and our core competencies are Microsoft, including Server, O365, Azure, and in other data center technologies, VMware, SAN technologies from EMC, Pure, HP, and we wrap it all with security. Our guests today are Brett Manty, former IT director at City of Waukesha, and James Jackson, former president at Orion Energy Systems. I'd like to introduce Brett.
Hey, Bill, how are you?
Good morning. Can you share a little bit of your background, Brett?
Sure. I was IT director for the City of Waukesha since 2006, managing a network that spanned the entire city. We had a metropolitan area network with roughly 25 sites, serving about 72,000 people, library, wastewater plant, police, fire, everything that you find in a city we took care of in a centralized IT department. We've also worked with counties, state, and other municipalities around the southeastern Wisconsin area.
Thank you, Brett. It's interesting, as a consumer and a taxpayer, you think about a city government and you kind of forget about all the other things that you're attached to outside of police and fire and maybe a bus system. So thanks for taking us through some more detail there.
Sure, absolutely.
James, can you give us a little bit on your background, please?
Sure, absolutely. So good morning, Bill and everybody. I'm Brett. So most recently, I was president of Orion Energy Systems, which is a publicly traded LED commercial industrial lighting manufacturer out of Wisconsin. My specific responsibility were sales operations, inside sales, customer service, sales engineering, and then on the senior leadership team for all our larger spend. So had a lot to do with IT and how we structured the business moving forward. Prior to that, just a lot of background on heavy acceleration, company acceleration, growth, or turnaround efforts. So everything I touched had to do a little bit with IT and its ability to either scale or be right-sized for what we're trying to do with the organization. But very happy to be here. Looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you. Great input. Terrific. We'll start off with some questions. I'll go ahead and lead the charge here. So Brett, let's start with you. As you look at your organization, how did you and leadership conclude that you needed to outsource different components of your IT environment?
Well, first, I want to say that there are disadvantages to outsourcing. So we had gone through a number of different factors to come to the conclusion we did. So we looked at some of the disadvantages. Every IT department, you hear outsourcing, and it's like, oh my gosh, my job's going to be gone. It's not necessarily the case. But some of the things that we went through is you have to wait for service. Well, those are things that you have to take into account as you're looking at outsourcing, and something you deal with in a contract as you're developing SLAs. There could be unexpected costs. The company might say that you need a X amount of dollar program, and the business might not think that's right for them. So those are all negotiation things. There's loss of control that's talked about. Security risks. That was a lot of talk with our police department about security risks. So all those types of questions came up when we were looking at outsourcing, because it really depends on the culture that you're in and what's important to them. I was able to get through all that with the benefit of outsourcing, and that's, you can focus better on what you do best. You do save money, though not as much in the first year. You can reduce your risk, and you can actually expand your team's worth of experience. Because if you're like any other IT department that I talked to, as we were, people are being tasked with too many things to do, and they're not experts in it. You can draw on a huge resource for outsourcing to do that, to hit those expertise areas. So basically, we looked at advantages and disadvantages of outsourcing prior to. Now, leading up to that, we had actually, if you're looking at ways to avoid outsourcing, we had been doing these things, I had realized once we started looking at outsourcing, and we had been doing them for a long time, and that is make sure that you standardize and simplify and consolidate as much as possible your IT infrastructure. So using virtualization standards to reduce some of the complexity in the IT department helps improve performance. It reduces your operating costs. Automating some of your system management, so deploying automated system and storage management tools, that helps lower labor costs. Automating application development, so if you can deploy any type of automated development tools and model-based methodologies to reduce the amount of time developers take in developing things for the business, that'll help save. More importantly, we had gotten into software as a service and open source products to help reduce costs also. So a lot of these things were happening prior to me actually looking into outsourcing. I had been doing these and I hadn't even realized it. So looking at software as a service, we were in the cloud with Microsoft long before. In fact, we were the first municipality in the state to be in the Microsoft cloud back when it was still being debated, is it safe? So I think everyone now just takes it as for granted that it is safe. Open source, we were using Linux to do a lot of our server development for some of our applications. That has its own problematic issues with developing a staff to understand open source, so you got to be aware of that. And then,
can I ask another question around the open source?
Absolutely.
That's a big component because a lot of the open source technology is free, right? You can download it and bring it into your environment. How did you vet some of those open source products? Can you give us a quick response on that, then we can move on to James?
Sure. Open source, again, we were using that for some of the server platforms. We also had an open source platform for a content management system. I'll just say this to everyone, free isn't necessarily free. There is still a cost to it, as you, again, have to have your people up to speed on it. So that could be some training. So there's training time involved, maybe buying some materials for it, even if it's free. Be aware that free open source means that you have access to the software and application, but there's little to no support that comes with it. You have to do that by yourself. Now there's an open source community, but then again, you're talking about you have to wait for responses to come back. So how did we vet? We vetted based on the platform that was most supported and had the biggest user community that we could tap into. So that's how we vetted some of the open source products we looked at.
Terrific. Thank you. Thanks very much for your response. James, in your environment, how did you conclude that you needed to outsource different components of the IT environment?
Yeah, from my perspective, it was slightly different. I mean, when I brought into a company or in charge of acceleration, it's the first thing I have to do is look at what needs to be different and how are we doing things today. So we really took the approach of what are we as a company, what are we good at, and what aren't we good at. And unfortunately, in that situation, in any situation like related to IT, when you get into heavy infrastructure, things like that, it's an event that usually causes you to start paying attention. It'd be nice if it wasn't that way, but that's typically how it can happen. And we were at a point where we had about $350,000, $400,000 in spend just to upgrade some of the infrastructure, some of the routing, switching, et cetera, with products becoming end of life. And that's where we really took a hard look at, do we really want to be in that business? Do we want to employ the right people to handle that infrastructure, or do we want to focus on making great lighting and leave that to the experts? So then comes in the question, really, the way I looked at it was, what's the risk? What's the cost? And then what does that change for the experience of both my internal customers and my external customers? and can we make it make sense without disruption? So there's some people concerns, there's some angst that comes into your team thinking, all right, does outsourcing the IT department mean they all lose their jobs? Which of course it does not. In fact, in most cases, if you're growing quickly, there's people that end up doing jobs they really didn't sign up for, because as time changes and expands, you just throw more on people's plate, and they're doing a lot of things that weren't their focus either. So really came back to full circle into that. What are you good at, and what aren't you good at, and where do you want to put your focus and your resources that are going to maximize profit? And then after you have that answer, kind of figured out, then you can dig into what are the risks and all that of the IT, and how do you leverage that. And it was both that piece, and then being more scalable for our customers that were pretty diverse across the country. And can we manage that effectively ourselves, or are we better off, leaving that to a SaaS model or something with some of the services we offered externally as well? So those are some of the considerations that went into the decision from our end.
Terrific, thank you. Brett, we'll jump back with you. As you dove into outsourcing, what steps did you take? You mentioned some of the technical things that you had done as an organization to that were not really part of the plan, but ended up being part of the plan before you started outsourcing components. Was there also a staffing component, or how did you manage the steps before outsourcing components with your staff members? How did you train them up or coach them up on why this was a good idea for them and for the organization?
Well, leading up to that, to James' point, the reason we were doing a lot of what we were doing, as every IT department does, to watch costs, was continual budget cuts. I think since 2008, we just continually saw our budget being hammered, being driven down further. Maintenance was going up. The budget cuts translated into lower operational labor costs for us. Outsourcing allowed IT to focus on our core business, which again, look at what you want to do and how you're going to do it, and fill that gap of internal staffing. Now, when we started looking at outsourcing, the first thing I did was establish a strategic direction and goals. So I thought about what the outsourcing would accomplish, and proper planning is and was critical for us. In my case, I used attritional losses to pay for outsourcing, so no full-time equivalents layoffs were needed. So again, going back to James' point, people started taking on different duties, and you have to strategically plan that, and you have to involve staff with that, so that there isn't a fear out there and people start leaving for something that they shouldn't be leaving for. In other words, they're afraid they're going to lose their job, so instead of losing my job through being laid off, I'm going to leave on my own. So explaining that and being clear, you have to ask questions to ensure you hire third parties who understand your particular business. Ask the questions, what have you done in the past, in my particular industry, or the particular task you're going to assign to them. What don't they know about the particular outsourcing or your business, because that's as critical as what they know. If they don't know your business and they've never dealt with it, that's a warning sign. Stay away. So who's going to be doing the work? These are things that the steps before we went outsourcing. Who's going to be the principal that's doing the work? Are they going to be outsourcing this piece, or are they going to be doing it internally themselves? Because some companies will outsource it. So an example is the construction of our website. Is the person building the site working for the company, or did they outsource that? So find out up front who will actually perform the work, and do a trial run well ahead of time to work out any potential issues or risks that you may see. Have deliverables determined and defined up front. SLA agreements have to meet your business needs, and again, that trial run will expose deficiencies. And one of the key things we went through is we actually looked at a couple companies for outsourcing and found that some didn't meet our needs. We cut our losses when we weren't getting enough response, and because poor results and deliverables aren't something that you agree upon in an SLA. Make sure you break with the company if you find that happening. If at all possible, make the contract a month-to-month to mitigate risks. So most companies are going to want to push for something beyond that month. They're going to want a year or a 2-year or 3-year contract. Well, that's all fine and dandy. It just makes it harder to break the contract if they're not delivering their SLAs. So, if you can make it a month-to-month, that's great, or quarterly or yearly is best. An outsourcing vendor will always, again, push for longer contracts. And then finally, make sure the outsourcing relationship is personable. I think you get a lot more out of it by being personable, open, and honest. Make sure that boundaries are set, they're clear and concise, and a good legal contract has been reviewed with your legal department if you have it. So those are the kind of things. So involve your staff up front, because communication is key as you're moving forward with this type of thing.
That's some terrific insight and suggestions for our listeners today. It's not as easy as it sounds when you say it out loud. There's complexity, there's legal issues, there's staffing, a lot of things that have to be right to make it work. Thank you for all those insights.
Yeah, and just be sure as you're looking at it and talking with your staff that the changes are geared towards areas the staff can handle, because if the staff can't take on a different type of duty, what you'll find is my staff started to become more vendor managers. So now you're, for example, help desk. We outsourced our help desk. The help desk manager became actually responsible for managing that particular contract with the help desk vendor. So they took on a different role of managing that, and then other duties that were assigned to them, managing our print fleet and setting up training programs based upon the results they got back from that particular help desk vendor. So looking at where we needed training and what departments, what areas, what applications. So planning it all out ahead of time helps deploying that outsourcing model.
Terrific, thank you. James, from your perspective, you may have experienced took different steps before going down that outsourcing path. Can you share some experiences there?
Yeah, again, I hate to keep beating the same point, but it was really taking a step back and looking at, strategically where was the company going, and then filtering that down. And I think it's ultimately about just creating that matrix. I mean, that's the effort that we went through of, should we build, buy, or partner in each area of the business? Even aside from IT first, you want to take that step and look at the business functions, build, buy, or partner. And that's based on the skills you have. So in order to do that, you have to have a good matrix of your internal teams, so that as you get to IT, what do we need to do to deliver a great experience to our internal and external customers? And then what type of resources does that take? And you have to clean slate it. You have to completely look at the business as if you know what you know that day. If you could structure it, take all the emotion, all the people, all the names out of it, and build it a certain way, what would it look like? And then how is that feasible? And then kind of back into what talent do you have at that moment in time. That's really the approach that we took, and we found where our gaps were in the talent of our people. Our head of IT was more of a software developer. So is that the right person to be managing a Cisco infrastructure or whatever you may bring in there, or your telephony system? So are we using the best of that person's resources and what we're, our expense for that person, or could we shift him to work on our controls that are part of our product, which he originally was hired for, and fill in the gaps? So it was really around the approach of making us look at the business differently, and then walking through, do we need to build, buy, or partner at different pieces of that? Is it something we could have the staff to do internally? And then to Brett's point around the partnership with an outsourced firm, as you walk through that, I think the other interesting thing that I've noticed on being kind of on both sides of the fence throughout my career is people naturally are used to an environment that is not outsourced, and you have to break your own people of that mold too. And what I mean by that, they're used to calling the IT guy or girl, and whether it's a big company, in my days at Cisco, you had an internal tech team that you called. You get used to that one person because they help fix, let's call it an exchange issue, and they were awesome on the phone. So next time you have some other issue, you want to talk to that same person. And so you have to break that mentality, because your issue the next time around, if you're non-IT, might not be an exchange issue, but you want to call Sally or Joe because they were awesome last time. and they're not the expert potentially in that area. So I think it
Right.
takes some internal education to understand what is the value of outsourcing, because now you're going into a group of people that are nameless and are going to put the expert for your issue based on what level it is to help or to support. So if you try to shove through an outsourced project or just outsource in general without the right engagement from the team and understanding the benefit to them and where the company is going or where the division or department is going, I think it can create a disservice, and it actually probably creates some strain on your outsourced partner as well, because they can't put Sally on the phone every time you call in. So those are some pitfalls that I see, but a way that we looked at it differently to kind of step through it and make sure we had a successful outsourcing engagement underway.
Very good insight, James. Thank you for sharing your thoughts there.
Bill, I'd like to comment on that, because James is 100% right. And one thing I didn't mention is I had to do a sales job to my internal managers and directors. I had the buy-in of my boss. Other people that reported to my boss were leery of outsourcing. They liked that touchy-feely of having that Sally or that Sue or Bill to be within the department to always talk with. So there is some selling and some education that has to be done, not only within the IT department, but also within the rank and file of other departments that you may deal with. So always take your customers into consideration when you're talking about it. Start slowly spreading the word. We're looking into outsourcing and what it means, and then educate them more and more to take some of that fear away. So it's not only within the IT department, at least within our organization, within the culture that existed. There's that hesitation that, hey, we're going to be dealing with somebody that we're not used to. We don't know what this is all about. So communicate it out, sell it, and basically in the end, I'll just say that, cutting to the chase, it worked out real well that the department directors, it took probably about 6 months to sell it to them. There was a lot of, you'll find out real quickly who's afraid of outsourcing for any number of different reasons. Sell to them even harder, and it'll be even more successful.
Terrific. We're going to go through one more question. I want to hold to our 30-minute timeline for our attendees. So I'm going to ask each of you gentlemen one more question, and we'll start with you, Brett. What was the economic impact of outsourcing? You talked a little bit about looking at the economics of it earlier in the discussion, but what overall was the impact of the economic impact to your organization?
Economically, you will not see a lot of, at least we did not see a lot of savings the first year if you're talking about tangible hard cash savings. We saw probably maybe a 10% savings depending on your budget. That could be huge, or in our case, it's not a super large budget, but it was enough. What you see long term is what you're planning for, and long term, what you avoid is you can like ours was attritional losses. So in the future with outsourcing, I avoided training costs. I avoided some internal management costs. That might be raises, vacations, that type of stuff. I don't have to manage that anymore. Through your SLA agreements and contracts, that vendor should have somebody taking care of whatever you're outsourcing 24/7, 365. So you don't have to worry about that anymore. So training costs go away, sick time, all that goes away. You don't manage that anymore. That's managed for you. That is a cost savings in the long term. All the costs for wage increases and health insurance, that all disappears. So long-term savings are greater than what you're looking at in a one-year time period.
Terrific.
But yeah, more importantly, it gives you the ability to be flexible. Scheduling becomes more manageable. Training isn't a large issue anymore. And I know it's a big thing nowadays. There's just no money, at least in my side of the world, in training. And you avoid a lot of technology headaches because you have experts working on it, and you're able to leverage that outside expertise.
Thank you. James, from your perspective, where was the economic impact? Was it, Brett mentioned it was, small in the early, but long term, he started to see some benefits. How about for your organization?
Yeah, I think if you took a pure IT spend perspective, it'd follow kind of that same pattern. I definitely think the payback was in line, and that's easy to do if you really take the right look at your infrastructure. And I think in most cases, if companies haven't explored outsourcing, you'll find that the payback is far better than you would think. And so we focused on how does that match to other areas of the business if you're looking to buy a new CNC machine in the factory or something like that. But so it's an initial spend, but I think the bigger picture for at least my perspective and my most recent situation was there's a number of roles within an organization that could be a little bit more high turnover, and we spent some money on a SaaS model software and built a more scalable and robust platform with a partner so that we could plug and play people, all the information remained there. So at any moment in time, somebody could pick up the phone, have a great history of that particular customer, whether it's a channel partner or an end user, et cetera, and not have a hiccup at all in their level of experience from the end user. So it tightened us with the customer, which accelerates sales and accelerates opportunity. It also created a system where we didn't need as many people to do the same job because we could overlap and people could literally just log in an instance and plug in. So we saw a lot of efficiency in one particular division I'll reference. There was requisitions for 40% increase in headcount. We actually let some attrition happen. Didn't have to let anybody go, but it ultimately worked out to be a 40% decrease in employee headcount, and none of this was in IT. It was leveraging IT to create better systems for the team in general. And by doing that, sales accelerate. You have less people, obviously your profit goes up exponentially. So we became more profitable in one division by going this route, and then started spreading that across the company. So I think you need to take a bigger picture. I completely agree with Brett that there's a little spike first year. The payback's definitely in line and absolutely worth looking at. Every business is unique, so you want to make sure you have the right partner to look at your business, which you mentioned earlier. But then you have to make sure if you really want to do justice to your company, you've got to make sure you look at the holistic approach of the effects and the other pieces of the business, and ultimately on the customer and your growth and profitability, and factor that in. Because if you're not factoring that in, you're only taking a piece of the information and you're skewing the numbers. And if you're in the IT department, I've got to believe that makes it a lot harder to sell, because I wasn't technically in the IT department, but when it came to me for approvals, that's what I was looking for. I want to know why we're doing it and what's the strategic advantage to building and making great lighting, because that's what I really cared about. IT was a function for us to get there, and that's not to diminish IT, but that was our core business, and everything had to be brought back to what makes your core business successful.
Thank you, James. Thank you both, actually. We're wrapping up here. I really appreciate the insight and knowledge that you both experienced or shared with your experiences on the call with us this morning. Thank you very much. Brett,
thank you.
Has to drop. You're welcome. We look forward to future conversations. Brett has to drop for another engagement this afternoon, so we will open up the floor for questions. Please use the technology within GoToWebinar to raise your hand for questions, and James and I can address. If you'd like to have a sidebar conversation with Brett at some time, feel free to contact me, and I'll be happy to make that connection to Brett for you. Questions?